Welcome to Season 3 of Creatively Speaking. I'm your host, Leanna Weller-Smith, the founder of Weller-Smith Design. In this episode of Beyond the Binding, I chat with Leslie Jonath, founder of Connected Dots Media. During our conversation, Leslie shares her perspective on the shift from traditional publishing methods to crowdfunding and custom publishing. She also shares what she learned from her successful Kickstarter campaign for Feed Your People, a community-based cookbook with recipes for crowd-pleasing, big batch cooking from warm-hearted cooks, chefs, and grandmas for the foods we gather around. The cookbook was co-authored with 18 Reasons, a beloved San Francisco-based nonprofit whose mission is to empower our community with confidence and creativity to buy, cook, and eat good food every day, and was published by Powerhouse Books. This episode is about the power of community and bringing book projects to life, and explores a different approach to book creation that extends beyond the boundaries of the traditional publishing model. Leslie shares tips on building and nurturing a community through her Kickstarter campaign, emphasizing lasting engagements and meaningful connections, and how the platform helped to build the creation of her vision for this passion project. So join us for this episode of Beyond the Binding to gain valuable insights on navigating successful crowdfunding campaigns, including tips for planning, audience engagement, and maintaining a customer-focused mindset throughout the publishing process. Let's get started. Hi, Leslie. Welcome to Creatively Speaking.
It's really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, I would love for you just to let everyone know a little bit about you, who you are, and what you do.
I am the owner and creative director for Connected Dots Media. I started Connected Dots Media after almost 18-year career at Chronicle Books. So I come from a background of photographic, illustrated, beautiful, lush cookbooks, garden books. I do all kinds of books. And I work with both businesses and authors to create beautiful content. And I'll get into why I called it content in a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. We were connected through mutual colleagues, and it was great to chat with you. So I know that you have a lot of similar clients to ours and a lot of synergies between the work that both of us do. But as you had mentioned, talking about, content, this whole series that we're recording for Creatively Speaking, we're calling it Behind the Binding. And what we really want to do is talk about all the different things that come along with publishing a book. How do you publish a book? How do you get media? How do you pay for this? There's all these little things that need to go into publishing, especially if you're self-publishing or even hybrid publishing. And I know you have a lot of unique skill sets and things that you help people through. That being said, especially one of the big pieces I want to talk with you about is around Kickstarter campaigns and fundraising, crowdfunding. I will let you just kind of go from there and just give us a little bit about what is all this when it comes to crowdfunding. What is crowdfunding and how does it work? And how did you even get involved with that?
Well, I think I want to step back a little bit because I think that when I think about why people want to do books, I think it's interesting, having been in the business for a long time. Initially, books were one of the few ways that people could create stories without money, right? So if you're going to create a film, you need money to buy a camera and a camera crew. And if you're going to create TV or any of these kinds of other medias back in the day, you really needed financial backing. And then with a book, I think a lot of people just like the idea that they can have a pen and paper. Again, this is metaphorically speaking. But once you get into publishing a book, which was exclusive for many years, you needed a publisher to pay you to do the book. So that was how you got funding to do a creative idea. It's like one of the easiest routes to getting a copyright that there is. So when I was at Chronicle even, I realized there were certain books that I believed in that the publishing team didn't. And so, as you know, when you're in-house, the publisher makes a decision based on how many copies they think they can sell. And that's based on past performances of other books. Still the same today. But I always thought, there's certain books that just had really interesting concepts that I believed if I could get someone to help me pay for it, I could convince the publisher, which led me into custom publishing. And custom publishing is essentially licensing, but the publisher is doing the creative work. It's not like a character that exists like Star Wars, but there's a fine line. So I think that's where I started to think about, how can I do interesting books and interesting work? How can I find a way to fund the projects I think are interesting? And so nowadays there's many different ways to do that. But if you're an influencer, you can do sponsorship. But for many of us who don't have big, giant followings, how do you fund your project? And it's always about finding your community and drawing on your community in some form to have them help you. And Kickstarter was exactly that model where I had a book. It was called Feed Your People. It was a book that I wanted to do that I couldn't get a publisher interested in. Even after having 20 years of experience in the business, I just couldn't convince anybody that it was a concept that they felt they could sell. Just to back up for a minute, that book was about feeding big groups of people. It was inspired by a party I have called Vodka and Latkes. And in that book, it really is about like, how do you pull people together, big groups, and feed them? And I solicited recipes from all these different chefs. Well, again, I couldn't find a publisher at the time that would fund me. I eventually did find a publisher that was going to pay me $10,000, but the cost of that book was going to be upwards of $40,000 or $50,000.
Yeah.
So I just went on Kickstarter and I created a campaign, and all those campaigns are designed for you to create media, to then actually pull together your community and ask for money, which is uncomfortable for everybody.
Yeah, right. It is.
It's really uncomfortable. I can go deeper into it in a few minutes, but that was the motivation for the Kickstarter. It was the way that even in traditional publishing, you're often in a situation where the money that you receive is not equivalent to the money you need to create the book.
Right. The
publishers do not give you the money based on how much it will cost you. They give you money based on how many copies they think they can sell. That's just the way it is. And so being creative around funding and fundraising, it's actually part of the process now.
Yeah, we work with a lot of the truly self-published authors. And whether they're doing a book or a lot of our clients do planners, calendars, journals, decks, all of that. They're smaller format. They definitely have a smaller following than some of our bigger clients, and they're not well versed in the marketing world, right? So that's another piece, is being comfortable making the ask and having these relationships with your followers. So they have been curious about these different routes of how they can go about getting the funds up front before they even put the money out. And it's an interesting concept. I mean, Kickstarter, and I think there's one of the other ones, they've been around for a while now, but I feel like they're helping so many people in different ways to really get their products out there in creative ways, because these platforms allow you to do a bunch of different things to get more purchases from each person. I don't even know all of the advancements of it, which is why I wanted to talk with you about. I have a client now she's in the midst of doing her Kickstarter. And I'm like, I should really talk with Leslie because I don't know anything about it. I've only paid people. I've only given into a fundraiser, but what goes into it? And since you wrote this book with chefs and other partners, were they on board with it as well when you first started coming up with the idea?
Yeah, they came on board. It brings up a deeper question for me, which is, why are you doing this book?
Yeah.
And every time before I work with a client, because I think people love the idea of having written a book, but writing a book is a really long and very involved process. And you have to be really committed. It's not just an afterthought. Like, I think I'd like to write a book. It's got to be like, you got to have a drive around it. I advise people a lot, like, how is it going to move your business forward? How is it going to move your message forward? How is it going to be creatively satisfying to you? That's what's the driver for fundraising or for doing any creative project. We all have projects that we think would be fun to do, but really when you're going to go deep like this, you have to convince not just your readers and your community, but yourself. And so for me with Feed Your People, I really felt like I kept getting no from publishers, which is fine. They didn't think they could sell a lot of copies. They're not wrong. But for me, I felt like there's no other book out there that teaches people how to cook for their communities, not just in metaphorically, like, hey, double the ingredients, but really. And so for me, I just was so obsessed with this idea in my own personal life. And I love throwing parties. And I love the idea of pulling together chefs. And I love the idea of being invited to a lot of people's parties.
Yeah.
I mean, what better thing than to get the opportunity to meet these chefs and cookbook writers. And even we did a giant fish boil with the Dolphin Club of San Francisco. So when you talk about your own podcast called Creatively Speaking, for me, the act of doing the Kickstarter was a creative process. Mm-hmm. The book doesn't start when you decide that you're going to start writing the book. The book starts before. The book starts when you do your Instagram. The book starts when you meet your people. So in terms of creating a Kickstarter, when I started, it's a lot of work. And so you have to, create a Kickstarter video. You have to get your assets together. You have to get photography. You have to have your narrative. You have to have your mission statement. It's all the same kinds of things you're going to use for your book anyway. And you make discoveries. And so you have to wrestle, as you do in a book proposal, with what is this book? Why is it different? What's your differentiation? Who is your audience? What are you saying? You have to get really clear about these things before you do the Kickstarter. And for me, that process was super exciting. That's where you start to actually see this is the satisfaction in doing the project. This is the process. So it wasn't just finishing the Kickstarter that was important or funding. It was the creativity that went into making the Kickstarter that was the most successful part of it for me.
Since you were already pitching this, trying to get this with publishers, did that also help when you were even putting the content together, like you said, for this? Like, since you were already very in tune with trying to get that mission and vision for the book out there, did that help, at least even just using that piece and your knowledge around what drives people to want to become part of that community? Did that help in that part of the Kickstarter campaign?
Creating a proposal is essential. And so I know when you're doing hybrid or self-publishing, you don't have to necessarily do a proposal. I believe you have to do a proposal. It's a business plan. Yeah. And you're going to go into it, you need to know all the same points as a proposal. As you know, you need a mission statement. You need to know your comparable research. You need to know the context. You need to know your audience. So having a proposal was the guider. The guider. I just made it work.
There you go.
Yes, I work in books. It was an essential tool, I'll say. That was one of those key tools.
Yeah.
I'm talking mostly about nonfiction books. I'm not talking about fiction. I want to contextualize that too. And for me, again, why was I doing this book? Well, as a cookbook editor and as a person in the food world and as a person who cares deeply about community, Feed Your People became a great tool for me because it set my brand, if you will. It set my path moving forward. So even though that book didn't sell millions of copies, for me in the marketplace and as a book packager and frankly, as in terms of my own personal mission statement, it was one of the most essential things I've ever done in my career. Is it a famous book? No. Is it something that was a real defining opportunity for me? It was very, very important.
And it really became obviously bigger than just the book. I mean, you were able to do so many other things once you created this. Like, it really was building that community, but then there were other things that kind of came from this. Is that correct? From what I was reading about it and the process that you took. Can you talk a little bit about even what came after the book was done?
Well, first of all, when you do a Kickstarter, you get a mailing list. Mailing lists are essential for just, again, creating community. If you're going to do some paid newsletter, you can do that. I didn't at the time, but it gave me an immediate community that was not just metaphoric. I actually had a mailing list that people bought into, that they were interested in, that was part of why they joined my Kickstarter. It also allowed me to bring in the chefs I was working with and uplift them. I did a bunch of events, whether it was at Salesforce or Airbnb. I figured out how to do some events. I didn't get paid for those. Let's be straight out about that. But it was, again, a great community builder. I did video, and this is part of doing any book, is that if you're going to do a book, how are you going to use that book to forward your message, to forward your career or your own creative opportunities? And so I did use all the different things I'd learned. Again, books are essentially composites or compilations of all the intellectual property. So now you would use those videos, you would use those assets, those photographs for my website, everything. So it was like a hub of a wheel where once I created all the assets for the Kickstarter, for the book, I could use them in all the different ways that we just discussed. There's still just all kinds of things that come out of it every day that, they're nuanced things that happen. I recently had someone call me. I've actually do a lot of floral design and books about nature. And I was
saying they're gorgeous. I've seen a lot of the things that you do. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm connected to a bunch of floral designers, and I was called by a tech business, and they said, we're doing an actual meeting for our leadership team, and we love your botanicals. Can you help us put something together? And it was the same as a book. Again, this is for me as a packager, not as an author. And I called up, two of my floral designers and I said, hey, we want to do this event. And they said yes. And lo and behold, we went off and did that. I did also a book called Forged Art. That was a book about how to make art from nature using petals and branches. And essentially it came forth because at the time my child was young and I couldn't stand all the waste with paper and glitter. And so I thought I was very inspired by Andy Goldsworthy. And then I and my co-author were commissioned by a Parks and Recs commission to create a giant heart out of natural materials in a park. It was called Heart Your Parks. And we did this 50-foot heart using logs and flower petals. The artist I worked with, his name is Peter Cole. And you can't even believe this. I mean, it was incredible. But one of those things that came straight from the book that I didn't even realize, I was like, oh yeah, sure. Every day you get a call from the city of San Francisco asking you to create a heart in logs and flower petals. And we got paid for that. Not a lot, but it was an arts commission. Again, I think it's just how you create your community. Your community might involve people who have different opportunities for your project and see it in different ways. So it's also just a bit about being open to it too.
So when you decided to kind of go that route with a Kickstarter campaign, what was the first thing then that you did technically, I would say? Because I think that's the other side of it, which is a lot of people that are non-technical, they get scared to use these sort of online services. How was it to use? And was it easy? Was there a big learning curve?
The tools that Kickstarter has are very straightforward, and they have so many amazing tools and study guides. I don't know what they call them. They say explainers. So I think it just takes looking at Kickstarter and spending some time with it. Again, I think if you're driven to do a Kickstarter, you have to be driven to learn it. And it is one of those things. They have lots of people who can help consult and help you through it. But I think Kickstarter itself has a lot of readers and a lot of different opportunities to just learn about it on the platform itself. It's pretty straightforward, I felt.
Do they also offer, I'm sure they probably do in their sort of Q&A and how to facts sections, but are they also giving you ideas on how to actually grow that community if you don't necessarily have one?
Yes, I think they have a lot of ways of helping you do that. They're very motivated to help you with your project. I think that's the way to enter into it, even if you have a little bit of tech phobia, is that a lot of tech companies understand that the people who are going to use their platform aren't tech people. Right. So I think there is a little bit of apprehension that non-tech people have around tech. And the one thing I know, having now I worked also in tech, is that you just have to poke around.
Yeah. Yeah, and cross your fingers sometimes, obviously.
I worked actually at Amazon for a period of time, and all the engineers.
Oh, wow.
They were finding it. I would think like, what is the magic thing I need to do? And they'd be like, oh, it doesn't work this way. Let's try that way. So I don't know if that's a comfort, but I do think that Kickstarter makes itself very available to people who are non-techers. But again, there's lots of different consultants. There's lots of people out there who really understand Kickstarter. And it, like all technologies, it evolves. So since I've done it, it's evolved. Since some of my clients have used it, it keeps evolving. And there's a lot of great support out there for people who want to use the platform.
Yeah. So when you are getting started with it and you're kind of putting together different packages, when you work with clients, helping them, or even on yours from your experience, how did you come about trying to brainstorm those ideas as to how you wanted to structure it? Because there's the typical, if you buy 10 books, you'll get this. And if you buy this, you'll get that. I'm curious as to how you approach those incentives, the tiers incentives.
Well, I think like any medium, it's the same thing I would say to people when they say they want to do a book. I say, what books have you read that you like? A lot of it has to do with you doing research on the platform itself. Mm-hmm. Look at those different campaigns. Look at ones that are in your category. Look at the ones that resonate with you. You have to do some research. And then you have to understand your audience. What is your audience care about? How much is your product? A person who's going to buy a $40 book versus a person who might buy a calendar. Like those are two different kinds of. So I have to do a lot of comparison in terms of what's out there. And then you'll start to see some patterns. You'll start to see some regular kinds of things people offer, whether it's postcards or it's a newsletter. There's a lot of things that are consistent within campaigns that would be helpful to see.
I'm looking at the Kickstarter campaign now because I can see it online. So I know that there's some sample pages in there, and I'm curious, did you get sample pages done and not do anything else? Did you just kind of move along with the project? How did you pace yourself on that side? How did that part work? Because I think that's where people get stuck. It's like, well, I'm seeing these things that have stuff already on it, but I don't have the money to do it. but then I want to get money to do it, but it looks like it's already done. So I'm curious how that part came, how you kind of approach that.
Yeah, well, there is a certain level of investment. It depends on how bad you want it. And so I did invest money. I invested in a video. I invested in sample pages. I invested. And so this is where the commitment comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you don't want to spend a lot of money, but how much money do you have? Because you're going to need something if you're going to create these assets. Yeah. So in my own mind, I was willing to do that. I was willing to do that because I saw the value in it. And I got way more value than I spent. I did a website. I did sample pages. I did a video on the service of creating a message and creating, a business opportunity for myself. And in my experience, it was not expensive because those kinds of things are invaluable. It does depend on what do you want out of your book experience.
Yeah. And I do think, when it comes to these type of services, you want it to be professional. You want people to know that you are invested in it as well. You're not just saying, I would love for you to fund me, but I'm not going to put any work in. And it's also showing that side of it too, to make sure that people know that, you have the dedication and drive to get it done. Did you have a certain monetary value you wanted to get to? I'm not sure if Kickstarter works where you have to hit a goal, or how does that work?
Kickstarter, you have to hit a goal. So that's the point of it. You have to set a goal and you have to meet the goal. And so goal setting is a really big part of it. And that's the hard part. I don't even know how to advise people on that. I went for $40,000, which was a lot. And I'm telling you, the beginning of the campaign, you get a lot of people join you. That's great. And then you're like,
I'm going to hit this in no time.
Then you're in the middle of the ocean with no wind. That's what happens. And all of a sudden you're in the middle of the campaign and you're just like super stressed out because okay, this is not going to happen. But there are lots of ways that you continue to communicate with people via emails, via the platform. Part of what they tell you at Kickstarter is that before you start a campaign, you already have to create a mailing list that precedes the one that you get. The prep for a Kickstarter is really important. You do need to get your assets together, but you also need to look through your emails and find every email of anybody you've ever worked with and compile a mailing list. You need to reach out to people before the campaign and just let them know you're going to actually do this campaign. So it's not like, oh, hey, I'm launching my campaign, done. It's 3 months before the campaign, you need to start rallying everybody and start letting them know what you're going to do. And I think it's also hard because you don't want to bother people, right? But you also want to let them know what's going on. So you have to think of the messaging behind a campaign is also really important. How are you going to message to your people? It's your community. You know better than anyone else what's going to feel nice for people. How do you invite them in? How is this an act of generosity? Not that you're being generous asking them for money, but what is it that you can do for them that's going to make it fun? How are you going to bring joy into their lives? And so when I was thinking, to get back to your original question, when I was thinking, what are the rewards? I definitely wanted something that was very low, not expensive for me, whether it was a postcard that I could, a thank you postcard, or whether it was my subscription to my newsletter that I would send them. So there's lots of ways to sort of invite people to the process that starts before you launch your campaign. So the prep is just as important as the post. It's a continuum. And even today, I still have people on my newsletter that I had from my Kickstarter where I send them updates about what other kinds of projects I'm working on. I try to inform them in terms of what other kind of fun trends are happening in books or in floral design or food.
That's interesting to have that longevity of the people, because that is the whole point. Just like you said, even just the point of the book, feeding people, being in community. And then once you have them in your circle, and then it's nurturing them too, sharing with them what you're doing, staying top of mind. And that's the beauty of creating these communities we have. I feel like when it comes to crowdfunding campaign, I think there's a stigma. I don't want to call it a stigma, but people are yeah, but I don't know all these people, but they become part of your people. That's the point of it. So just like you said earlier, you're not just asking for money. You can become part of something by joining something like this.
That's really well said. That's exactly right. And I think that's a great driver too. It's when you think about your content, again, this is nonfiction, but how is what, because I really felt people having thrown big parties and big dinners, and people want to do that. It's overwhelming.
Did it?
So one of the things I said that I learned in my project was that part of cooking for big groups is inviting people to cook with you. That was a big part of the book, was don't go at it alone. Don't go at creating a dinner party by yourself. Everybody comes to the door, they come to your party and say, what can I do? And being with people in community cooking is really about like connecting. It's all about connecting. And so similar for the book, which the funny part about the Kickstarter is 1 million people were a part of that party. That was a theme that continued throughout from the beginning of the Kickstarter all the way till we got to the big, huge parties that I was having in celebration of the book. And it was like, what do I take away from that was like, how do you invite people in? How do you make it a good experience? How do you make it a good experience for the people around you? It's not just about funding. It's really about creating something with people, with them. Yeah, with them. So that actually made a lot of sense. I think that's what the hardest part about marketing is. People feel like, they don't want to talk about themselves. Well, you don't have to. Talk about the thing you love. If you drive from that and the reasons why you did the book and how you hope the book will serve people, then you're always going to be on solid ground.
I think that's a theme that I have found even with a lot of our clients, and what makes them successful is that they are including their community in the whole journey. So it's like they feel like they're part of the whole process. And that's similar to what's happening here. And I think, just like you said, it doesn't matter if it is a planner, a journal, calendar, book, because it is the bigger vision as to who you're helping and who you want that to help in the future, like all the different pieces. One of our clients is doing like a financial planning system, but it's really based on values and inner work that you have to do. She's the one that's going to be doing her Kickstarter campaign. And I think that that's really what she needs to obviously focus on. It's that holistic side of it. It's not necessarily just about getting the people to donate to my cause, because that's not the point. The point is it's a teaching tool in a sense.
Oh, yeah. It's totally about audience. I mean, that's one thing having had the experience of bringing in Amazon is that it's all about customer focused. Mm-hmm. How is this going to help the customer? That's every single decision you make about your book, about whatever it is how is this going to help the person I'm trying to help? I might want to say it this way, but if I say it this way, is it actually going to land with the customer in a way that's going to help them? How can this thing that we're creating together help you? That's a really fun question to answer. I think that's the question I'm always interested in. When I'm in the middle of a project with an author and we're hitting a wall, it's like, okay, we can go this way or this way. What's going to help the reader? What is going to help them? It's hard. And then you know what you have to do? You have to go and talk to people. You have to go out in the community, whoever you can meet, and do a small sample and see what people say. And you'd be surprised. And it's so great. Those discoveries, that's the fun part.
That's the gold in there, right? Especially if you just take that time, because I think that's the other piece people power through. And if you don't step back and ask the questions and just get curious, that's where things can fall to the wayside, I think, for sure. Just not hit the mark of what the goal and purpose was initially. Yeah. And you set out.
Yeah. And you used the right word, which is curious. I mean, I think that is a word of the moment, which is how do you stay curious? How do you not get seized up with your own anxiety and just say like, wow, okay. Don't understand that. Let's learn. Let's find somebody who knows. Let's ask some questions. And then, asking questions of yourself. Like, I just think sometimes when I'm interested in doing something, it's always the why. And what you said about your client, a financial planner, everybody in the world is trying to figure this out. Like, how do you take care of yourself, your finances, your world? Like, how do you do that? And so if you have something that you used in the past, a tool that can be helpful, that's meaningful for a lot of people. Well, where is that audience, by the way? That's the other thing is, where is your audience, right? Are there associations? Do you know somebody who knows somebody? Where do you find your audience,
Mm-hmm. So since this was a compilation, you had different chefs. Did you involve them in the Kickstarter process? Did they help do any promotion for it with their communities as well?
I didn't ask them to do promotion. I just felt like they have so much going on. But I did ask 3 or 4 chefs if I could use pictures of them. I talked to everybody about it. I let people know that that's what I was doing. So I did enough of the work and talked to enough people to know that they were excited about the project. They weren't
actively, yes.
They weren't active in it. I didn't want them to do anything. I just really wanted them to be a part of it.
Yeah, and even just them being part of it in general, that is also a good draw too, because you can draw upon that. It's always nice when you don't have to actually depend on that side of it either. You can kind of take care of that yourself, I think.
Yeah.
So were there any challenges when you started working through with it? Like when you got into the system and you started kind of going through it? I know you'd said like in the beginning, it's like this rush of like people. And were there any sort of rough patches or challenges that you experienced?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, you get halfway through it and you think, okay, everybody said they want to do it. Now I actually have to write a second email to everybody. I don't want to write that email.
Yeah.
I don't want to. And then you have to do it. You have to think ways to I think it's like you have to figure out a way to create another invitation, and you have to be creative around getting through some of those blocks. And, creating the assets is not easy either. And spending the money to create the assets is something you have to decide in yourself. Like, how are you comfortable with those things? What are you willing to do for this? But also being mindful of your own budgets and being mindful of finding people who can work within them. So I think those are some challenges that are not insurmountable, but are things to think about. And yeah, I think just, anytime you embark on something that you don't know you're doing, I think what you had said earlier is staying curious. Even if you're so prepared and you do everything that you know you're supposed to do, there's going to be something that's going to come up. This is true of all of life that you didn't expect.
Yes.
Every single book that I work on, and I'm assuming,
oh yeah,
you think like, okay, I've done this a million times. What could go wrong? And that's challenges come up, things happen. And the way that you're successful is to just look at it and think about what is the best thing for the book? What is the best thing for the audience? What is the best thing for me? How do we create this thing together so that it's going to be, how do you get rid of the friction? So that's where being prepared is really great. That's where doing as much preparation beforehand. That's where communicating with your team, creating timelines, all those tools. I think tools are really essential, whether it's, your own process that you document or it's something that you create a creative brief for the people you're working with, so
that everyone's on the same track.
Yeah, I think it's not just hey, let's start a Kickstarter. It's okay. Step 1, let's do a creative brief. Step 2, do you have a book proposal? Step 3, let's create a video. Step 4, we're going to shoot some photos. Those photos are going to cost this amount of money. So how am I going to amortize those that costs over my website and my, it's a lot of sort of bigger picture thinking so that you can make the case to yourself so that you use the process of the Kickstarter or any of your methods to infuse your whole business. Mm-hmm. It's not just about the book. It's got to be amortized over something larger for yourself.
Right. I think that's a great positioning for it. I think the common theme that we've been talking about is it is more than the book. That's what it comes down to. And going back to that main vision for it and the focus is really what's going to drive the success of it as well.
I had one author and she was doing a flower book. Through various channels, she ended up getting on Martha Stewart Living. Wow. So again, her book did okay. But she was on Martha Stewart Living. There's nothing better. I think a lot of it has to do with how do you define success for yourself? Mm-hmm. And that's one of the questions I ask people is, what is success? Because as you and I know, book selling is hard. Lots of people are publishing books. So if what does that success look like? Maybe getting a book deal is really important to you and you get it. That's great. But I think where people can sometimes feel disappointed is that there's this idea we have in our minds of to be successful, it means you're going to be on the New York Times bestseller list. Right. And you know what? Maybe you can do that. I have one author who got on that list because she had a huge community, but also she knew how to use her generosity, I would say, to motivate her community to buy that book.
Yeah.
But again, I think that book was part of the larger cycle of her entire brand.
Right.
She has classes. It's just
one piece of that whole ecosystem.
Exactly. It's not the wheel. It's a spoke on a wheel. Her genius was in understanding how to pull in her audience through her newsletter to give classes. But it took years for her to build it. It took a long time.
Yeah. And I think that's what people aren't realizing too. This is not overnight. This takes time. And even with these Kickstarters, they are on some sort of timeline, correct? Do you get to actually set that? Or do you say, I want to take 3 months to get this or 2 weeks?
I don't do that. You'd die.
How is that set up? Because I have no idea.
Well, okay, it's been a while since I've done it.
Yeah.
But I think it's 30 days. I think you can set it, but you don't want to set it too long. The whole point of Kickstarter
is to get in and get out.
Yeah. You do not. Indiegogo, I believe, used to be, is one where you don't have to fund the whole thing, but I still think it's a compressed timeline. Don't quote me on that. I just think it's important to have that sort of psychologically, that beginning and end point.
Yeah, I've never actually done one. And like I said, I'm usually the one that's just contributing to them. So I'm take my money, and so I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the most recent one I did was with an illustrator. And I think the idea is that she asked for a smaller amount of money and then she overfunded. And that was actually good. I mean, you can overfund. You can go lower. Okay. Yeah. So, the psychology of price setting is a whole episode we could go into. Now, in retrospect, I think, wow, I can't believe I got that. But if you go on the Kickstarter platform, if you want to do something, you need to spend a long time poking around on Kickstarter to see what's happening now. It's a very wonderful opportunity to see how people are doing, what books are funding, how much they're funding for. Like, there's a lot of ways to see it. But yeah, my experience was that a smaller amount of time was better than a large.
It's better than, yeah. I'm like, oh, just do it for 6 months. Like, I have no idea. Which, now that you say that, then it makes sense. And it also makes sense too for the people that are actively involved in funding those, because then you feel like this sense of, with the truncated timeline, if you miss out, you miss out. So you don't want to miss that window, especially when it comes to different opportunities that you can get with the tiers, I guess. And I do think Indiegogo, that was the other one. I couldn't remember the name of it. So there's Kickstarter, Indiegogo. They're definitely different. I know when I was talking with my client, she was saying that Indiegogo, you don't need to hit the amount, so you still get funded. What happens if you're on Kickstarter and you don't hit your amount then? Is it all going in like to an escrow account and then it gets
it'll go back. Yeah.
Got it.
I mean, there's pros and cons for all of the different ones. I think they're just, and I don't know the statistics on this, but it also depends on like how many people are on the platform. So, you asked me earlier about like, what if you don't have a big following? Well, so Kickstarter also is a platform.
Is the platform.
So similar, I think Substack is similar. The algorithm is such that you meet,
seeing what people are searching for, it's feeding them the different opportunities. Yeah. I was hoping that it did that, because I do think that then it helps somebody who really doesn't truly have that bigger audience to get more organic reach in that way.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that way. Yeah.
So in your opinion, what are the like starting points? Because just like you said, you could go into a whole episode talking about, how much you want to price it for, put in your numbers. So if somebody is interested and they want to get started, what are even the core 4 things that you think that they need to focus on before they actually start to dive in?
Number 1, you need a really strong message. You need the pitch. It's got to be tight. It's got to be a paragraph tight pitch. I do think spending a ton of time on the platform, if you're going to do it, you got to spend a long time looking at it. Look at comparable projects, look at their price points, look at their funding, look at all of it. Just learn as much as you can. Create really beautiful assets. I think it's worth putting the energy into that, because even though the book design was completely different when we finally did the book, the act of creating those pages, the act of doing the research was essentially starting the book. So I think you need to do that. And what's my 4th point to say? I don't know. Remember why you're doing the project. That's what's going to get you through the harder time, is really understanding your own motivation for the why behind doing it.
I think that's true. And, these platforms, they really do help people to get their vision out into the world and connect with people that are like-minded, that really resonate with the mission. And it is important to have that powerful sort of messaging, just like you said, to really draw them in and to get them on board with your vision and mission for the whole project, no matter what it is. Like, it really is about finding the community. And these types of services allow for people who don't have the actual funding or aren't getting picked up by a traditional publisher and they need help with funding a self-published product, it really opens up the doors for them. So gives them a lot more opportunity. But Leslie, I know that you just got back from a big trip and now you need to go to sleep. But I want to say thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else around the Kickstarter campaigns or things that you feel that we should mention before we end our time together?
I really think you did a wonderful job as an interviewer. So thank you. As I said, I think it's really a great tool. And I think that exploring tools when you're doing a big project, whether it's a book or some sort of amazing creativity, there's a lot of interesting opportunities. It just takes doing a little research and talking to some people and seeing what works.
Yeah. And you do help clients to set up Kickstarter campaigns, correct?
Yes.
Right. So I would love for you to just let everyone know how they can reach you, how they can connect with you. Leslie is amazing. Even just going back and looking at your portfolio again, I love the flowers. I love all of the beautiful colors, and you're so creative and talented. And we have a mutual client, so I know what you've helped her create that is just beyond what I think either of us could have thought when she first started. So I know that you are a master at drawing out the true vision from your clients, which is very impressive. impressive to do. So I would love for you just to let everyone know where they can find you on the interwebs here.
Well, thank you. That's so kind of you to say. And I definitely feel like there's something about understanding kind of what the essence of somebody's getting at. It's hard. It's hard to do it by yourself. So I think this idea of helping people through a process is always a delight, or can be. I'm at Leslie at connecteddots.com, connected dots, 2Ds, and you can find me there. And I'm also on Instagram. I don't know what my handle is.
We'll make sure that we have it in the show notes. We'll be putting a bunch of different links in there. But I always like to
Instagram is actually an easiest way to get a hold of me. I do have Connected Dots Media is on Instagram. So
it's on Instagram too.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think I know that's where I follow you too. So I get to see all the things, which I'm always so jealous because lots of flowers, like you said earlier.
Oh my gosh, this season is full of flowers. So.
That's great. That's good to hear. Because it's gloomy here today and I love flowers. So Thanks again, Leslie. It was a joy.
Yeah, you too. Thanks again.